Hi there, I'm Christine Zips, and today I have the pleasure of having as our guest for Fireside Chats, Tom DeWeese. And I was just sharing with him that he's been on my short list of favorite resources as a researcher, journalist myself, health rights advocate for many years. And I just have a huge admiration for him. But today was the first time I had the pleasure of meeting him face to face, so that was really great. So I'd like to, if I may, as a way of introduction, many of you I'm sure know of him, but I've pulled some excerpts from his biography and I'd like to read those to you now. Tom DeWeese is one of the nation's leading advocates of the individual liberty, free enterprise, property rights, and back to basics education. For over 30 years, he's fought against government oppression. Tom served as state coordinator for several local and national grassroots political organizations from 1968 to 1977. In 1974, he was a candidate for the Ohio legislature. In 1988, Tom established the American Policy Center. In 1992, Tom DeWeese became passionately involved in the fight for the preservation of American private property rights and against intrusive environmental regulations. He is also a recognized leader in the fight to preserve American national sovereignty from intrusive United Nations policies on global governance. Since 1995, Tom has served as editor-in-chief of the DeWeese Report. He makes regular appearances on radio and television talk shows and has had articles published in several national publications. In 1999, he was accepted as a life member in the National Registry of Who's Who. He's also an author of books including Now Tell Me I Was Wrong and the political thriller Erase. I'm a big fan. Is it too late to get this autograph, Tom?
Nope.
So, welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. I appreciate it.
Yes, my pleasure. So I think we're going to be focusing on three main topics today. So starting with the Green Deal and Agenda 2030, including the left's plans to use the pandemic tactics to enforce this policy. So Tom, we seem to have something in common with having dove down many a United Nations Agenda 21, 2030 rabbit hole. For me, it was about 12 years ago after a friend sent me a link to a John Anthony presentation on the topic. So what started you on this path?
Down the path of against Agenda 21 and so forth.
Awakening.
Well, first, back in the mid-90s when Bill Clinton was president, my real focus at that point was the education system, what they were doing, school to work, Goals 2000, workforce development boards. We did everything we could to stop all of that from getting into the schools. But I began to work with some folks, particularly out in the West, some ranchers and mining people, timber people, and I began to see these environmental regulations. And the thought started coming out, what about the property rights of these people? And that's what started me down the road. And then in 1992, a real mentor of mine, Henry Lamb, was going to these international meetings. And Henry was there when they introduced Agenda 21. And he came home from that and he brought a bunch of us together that had been working together and spent all day in a conference telling us all about Agenda 21. And it was one of those kind of things like, and here's another thing, and here's another thing. And we were sitting there kind of holding our heads saying, please, no more. But that started it. And I became one of the really top 3 or 4 people talking about Agenda 21 and trying to get the word out on it. We created a national conference called Freedom 21. We had 10 national conferences and kind of built a cadre of activists to understand what it was about. And we've been fighting it ever since.
it's not an easy road. And if you're like me, there's simply no way you cannot do this. With me, I'm like compelled to do mostly to raise awareness for what's happening to our children. And I'm really focused on what's happening in the schools, but also have lots of interest in the other areas you're specializing in. So, I know that we're going to be talking about the Green New Deal, the connection with Agenda 21, 2030. But how did you come to realize that connection? I mean, the notion, it just sounds so absurd when you think about how the Green New Deal was born. I think, like you mentioned, from a quirky bartender or someone who goes by AOC and getting onto the political platform and making that a really big deal. And I think you mentioned early on that it wasn't really taken seriously at first. Like, how could that be a thing, right? and I just, I'm just wondering, how did you uncover their plan to launch a drive to impose the Green New Deal at every level of American government?
Well, I'll tell you what.
In 20 words or less.
How did we make this connection? Knowing every aspect of what Agenda 21 and its policy of sustainable development is about and what they are planning to do, and following it over all 20 some years. And it's very simple when you read the Green New Deal and so forth. So they come together and have these international meetings every few years, basically to rally their people, keep them in the game, change the name, say, oh, this isn't that. Since we made Agenda 21 a major issue, all of a sudden they started saying that it was, oh, you mean that innocuous 20-year-old document that has no enforcement capability? And they try to make fun of us that way, but they keep coming, and every plan they come out with, went to Agenda 2030, now the Green New Deal. Each one has more detail. They get more bold as they talk about it. There's absolutely no difference between Agenda 21 and the Green New Deal. They're just being more bold about what they say. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe I've shared that I went down there and I saw the things that were connecting. And I'm just thinking, when you look at all the goals from the old Agenda 21 and like your colleague, Rosa Koire, I learned a tremendous amount from her, as well as like the late Michael Kaufman and Michael Shaw and John Anthony, and others, Dan Happel, along with the other ones that have really educated me. And it's just amazing. But one thing I wanted to ask you that I've been observing, so many people. I've had the pleasure to get to know some folks who have extensive expertise and experience in so many areas that are related to the work that I'm doing. And yet there are quite a few of this group who seem to be very strong believers in man-made climate change. And I'm kind of along the camp that believes it's a myth, to blame it on man-made, but I'm not an authority. But I find it so fascinating that it's such a hot topic. You can be at a party and just whisper the words climate change, and it's going to be boom. There doesn't seem to be any gray area there where people are on the fence. And I just want to know the truth. And why do you think that is such a hot topic?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm like you. I just want to know the truth. And if there is a real damage, I remember when we were talking about the ozone layer was a big deal, that it was thinning. I was concerned about that, and I was looking into it and trying to find out what the truth was and so forth. That's all I have ever wanted, is the truth. And what we've found as we've gone along, to answer your question, why is it everywhere like that? It is all the news media and almost every government agency are promoting these ideas. And you have very little that comes out that makes it out in opposition. The major science publications that should carry both sides and tell the truth, and here's what this scientist found, here's what that scientist found. Let them have a debate on it. Instead, they have blocked grants from what they call the skeptic scientists, people like Willie and others that have done extensive research into this and find that there's no proof whatsoever of anything that man has done to hurt the environment. They have had all kinds of scientific research done into it to find there is nothing there. There hasn't been any warming in the last 20 years. So that means that kids who are graduating from high school this year have never experienced any warming. And yet all the scare tactics of melting ice and polar bears drowning and islands being flooded and so forth, none of that has happened. Polar bear populations are growing all over, where they grow. And this is what we keep finding. But these science magazines have blocked anybody from saying anything against it. The news media is completely biased into this. And when you get right down to it and you begin to find out why won't they let it go? Why will they not sacrifice it? Several of them have said, we've got to follow this global warming issue, no matter whether it's false or not, because this is the right way to go to help the environment and help the economy. And so, this basically what it is the root of everything that they are pushing. Agenda 21, usually you'll find a logo. You'll find this kind of logo in almost every document that comes out with it. It's 3 connecting circles. It's what we call the 3 E's. It's social equity, environment, and economy. And this encompasses everything in our lives, everything. And they start talking about the economy. We have to do this for the economy. And of course, social equity is now raging across the country. You're seeing the examples and the effects of social equity in your streets right now. And this is where it's heading. It's redistribution of wealth. It is complete tearing down of an economic system and rebuilding it to a different structure and so forth. That's all social equity. That means that, of course, social justice is the other word. And the point is that our justice system is being torn apart in the name of social justice. And so the rule of law means nothing. It's how I feel about something. And, that's what's driving everything. Well, if it comes out that climate change is false and it doesn't hold up, then their entire structure collapses. So even though more and more and more science is coming out, there are 30,000 scientists who have signed a paper saying we are not finding any proof of this whatsoever. And they tell us that 90% of scientists are in agreement with this. And the fact of the matter is they've got something like 2,700 scientists that are saying this. And if you go down through what their credentials are, you'll find out a whole lot of them aren't even scientists. So there is no consensus. And the fact of the matter is science can't have consensus. It's not a football game. It's not a vote, a democracy, a ballot box thing. Science is real. It's fact. And sometimes we find what we've been looking at all these years is not really what the truth is. And so, you can have a whole lot of scientists always believing a certain thing. Back before the apple fell, then, people didn't know anything about gravity. And, all of a sudden it changes everything. It's like, oh, look at this. And so that's how science is really done. And so trying to make it a consensus, democracy, or whatever, is just a political agenda to put a specific idea in place, and everybody's supposed to believe it. The global warming is what I've had environmentalists say to me is, it doesn't matter what rights you think you have if you don't have a planet to stand on. So fear becomes the major factor. And the thing they landed on of how do they get control of the entire global economy and everything else in the world, they came up with the tactic of environmental Armageddon. And that is what this is all about. That's why they're pushing it like that, and it's why it's everywhere.
Yes. Oh, gosh. Thank you for that. And I believe I shared with you that years ago you did a wonderful presentation talking about somebody was saying, well, how can they how can they get away with all this? How can they accomplish all that they're trying to do? And I believe it was related to the education, maybe even Common Core. And I know we're not going to get going into that, but something that you said reminded me, connected with climate change, is that you said, he said, this is how I believe you said, this is how I believe they do this. They basically have stolen a generation of children born from around 2005 to 2015. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is about a decade old ago that I heard this. But, you know, you said this generation of children, they've never seen a sky without white stripes. They've never seen a phone with a cord, and you know that they've never known of food without GMOs and all of that. So they're more impressionable, is what I took away with that. And what I've seen also in the schools, they have the children marching against climate change. They have Greta Thunberg flown all over the world, you know, meeting on the Capitol steps, leading the march of the children. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, really? Like, it's just amazing. But
Yeah, children are a blank slate. They're born and they have to learn as time goes by. And it's up to us to teach them. And we've had a school system in the past that was based on academics and history and, you know, facts, science, and so forth. That has been, and we trust that. Our parents still trust the school system to be teaching their children academics. They come home with an algebra book. They come home with a geography book. Well, there it is right there. Look in those books. It doesn't matter what the subject is, English literature, you are going to find sections in those books that talk about the effects of climate change and the heroes, the non-governmental organizations, the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, the World Wildlife Fund. All of them are heroes that are saving the earth. And everywhere they turn, it's all that. They hear nothing else. And they have scared them to death. We've only got 12 years left before the earth is gone. You know, this kind of thing. And
it's criminal.
Absolutely. It's no wonder you find so many kids out in the streets right now so angry. They have been led to that, believing that we have destroyed the earth and we are the culprits that need to be gotten rid of so everything could be fixed. That's the attitude that they have been pumped with.
Is it not true that it's unconstitutional for a government, like a U.S. government, to do business with a foreign entity, such as United Nations, with their NGOs and their public-private partnerships? And, you know, and they're working at the local level. And I don't know how that can come to be. That, does it seem like we should be getting the UN out of the U.S. and vice versa? Ideally.
Yeah. The United Nations, its entire drive is global governance. Mm-hmm. And that is illegal. The United Nations is a club with memberships that pay dues. And that's all it is. It was designed to supposedly for countries to get together after the horrors of World War II. They wanted to have a place where we could discuss our differences without having to kill each other on the battlefield. Truth of the matter is, ever since the United Nations has been there, we've had more wars than any time in human history, and they never end. You know, the Korean War was the first one. It's still going on. They never ended it, you know, because the UN stepped in and said, okay, everybody stop, instead of settling the situation. And that's what they have done. And what happened then, as I mentioned, they said the Agenda 21, when it was introduced at the Earth Summit in 1992, they said this is just voluntary. It's just for countries to decide if they want to. First of all, it was never a treaty, and the U.S. Senate did not ratify it as is required by the Constitution to do that. It was never
signed, yeah.
It's supposedly a suggestion. Well, Bill Clinton became president in 1993, and he issued an executive order to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development. The purpose of that council was to take the suggestions of Agenda 21 and turn them into federal policy. On that council were representatives of just about every federal agency. And if you go into every agency's website, you will see a section, sustainable. Sustainable development is the policy of Agenda 21. And so you will see every one of them is promoting this. Also on that council were some of the very NGOs that wrote Agenda 21 in the first place. And what these NGOs did was they took over the job of writing the grant programs for all these different agencies, for HUD, for EPA, Department of Transportation, and more. And they put small print in there to for a community to take this grant and comply to it. These are things they had to do. And so then, after they did that, those same NGOs went into the state legislatures. And they got state legislatures to pass legislation that said every community needs to do a comprehensive development plan. And so when they did that, now the city councils, the county commissions are sitting going, what the heck is a comprehensive development plan? Same NGOs went in and they said, don't worry, got it all right here in a box for you, got the money for you too. Step by step by step, that's how they did it. And through the local level, they have been pushing these things through. Now, somebody like me comes up in front of city council and says, do you understand what you're doing here? These NGOs are standing behind them saying, don't pay attention to him, the guy's nuts. And then I get another tinfoil hat. So this is how it operates on the local level up to the state legislature. Not edicts that absolutely coming down from Congress, but this way. Now there are some regulations coming down from Congress as well to do that, but the real force of this has been through the local level.
I've been called Pollyanna before, but I can't help but wonder how come they're just have like carte blanche? They can just kind of run all over and make up their own rules as they're going on. Why is there nobody around to say, back up? No, I don't know.
Well, we're trying to do that.
Exactly.
One of the things that has been done here. What's the first thing? Let's say, okay, community is aware of some bad things happening there, and they want to change that. And so you have an election for city council, or a mayor, or a county commissioner. And we think we got some good guys that will listen to us, and we've elected them to that. Here's the first thing we do in almost every county community in the country. We take these new elected representatives and we send them off to the National Organization of Counties, or the National League of Counties, or the National Conference of Mayors. Do you know that while they're there, speaking from the podium at these places are these same NGOs, and they're giving them sample legislation, and they're bringing up all these different people who are saying, here's what we did in our community, and here's the latest. And they've got one NGO, it's called What Works Cities. And it's all right here for you. We're going to make every community the same. And, they step that. Now, those city councilmen or whatever come home, and they've already been given sample legislation. They've been given the speech. They've interacted with others who all think the same way. And they come home, and the representatives of the same NGOs say, hey, did you get that sample legislation? Got it for you. Everything's right here. They begin, after a while, to believe this is the proper role of government. All they hear is this kind of policy. And then when somebody walks in and says, whoa, wait a minute, they've never heard our side of this. They've only been pounded with the other side, and we sound really, really weird to them because everybody's doing it. That's how it happens.
That's just amazing. It's like, do they think we're not noticing that these same people are showing up? Like, it's kind of insulting, isn't it? Just like, oh my God.
Well, actually, that we aren't noticing it, because rarely do our people go to these meetings. And they have public meetings. They'll announce in a tiny little ad in the newspaper that nobody's reading anyway, that they're going to have a public meeting on something, or they have a development. They've created the development board. They've created a water board. They've created a energy board. All these things. There's so many things to go to. Now, these guys, these NGOs, are getting paid to be there, and they're at every one of those meetings. And we are trying to raise our children, trying to work our job, trying to live our lives. Government's supposed to help us do that. And so we're not there. How many times have I had elected officials tell me nobody from our side ever shows up? Now, if we do, now one of the things they use as a tactic are facilitated meetings.
The Delphi technique, right?
Yep.
The Delphi technique, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have a facilitator who has been trained in psychology, and he knows, he's been instructed, the outcome of this meeting is this. And he sits down and he starts to lead them in that direction. Now, everybody, he gets, the minute you start answering questions and participating, you're in. And they know how to play with that and how to bring it. Now, have somebody like one of us who understands the game, and we start, say, whoa, wait a minute, that's wrong, this or that. Now you will become the target. And, one of the examples, my friend Beverly Ekman, who wrote a whole book on this, said, what they'll say is, even Beverly could understand this. Even a child could understand this.
Oh my.
That's what they do. So people don't want to be ridiculed, so they don't say anything. And they sit there and then it comes out. The community supports this. That's what they come out with. And so they move. And so your city councilman and so forth just moving right along because, well, the people want this,
Yeah.
So they're used as much as we are.
Yeah. I mean, talk about bullies, they're not just on the childhood playgrounds, they're in the so-called adult world these days too. So yeah, I know Rosa Koire has talked a lot about the Delphi technique and how they position the facilitators around, and how she suggests going into these meetings and don't sit together, but you position yourselves around there. And so there's techniques that you can stand up to it, but it doesn't seem real easy to try to make any headway with that. But
we're outnumbered.
Yeah.
Take a look. As I've been trying to work on how we're going to move forward and how we're going to train people to go about this and everything, before March, I knew full well how to do this. I've been studying it for 27 years and what we do. Now, all of a sudden, we have a whole new paradigm that we're dealing with, and how do we deal with that? But take a look. Who is it that's shutting everything down? Who is it that's allowing these riots to take place? Who is it that is putting all this, allowing this stuff to be put in place? The mayors, the governors, local. And it's not coming down necessarily from the federal government. Not saying that some things aren't, but basically it's coming from these local. This is Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, Green New Deal, all that, all wrapped into in one place. You're seeing the tactics, you're seeing the agenda being put in place at the local level, and that is where we have to fight it.
Exactly. You were leading me into my next question, which was, it seems to be interesting timing for all these goals being realized at an alarming rate, along with this big panic of 2020 rearing its head around February, March. And do you think there's any connection? If so, why? And you keep mentioning who is doing this, and who indeed, right? WHO with Dr. Bill Gates, Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, what we started to notice. I'm trying to find my notes on it. We've had this pandemic issue that has come out, and I started to get back in the end of April or so emails and communications between some of these NGO groups talking about how we use the tactics from the pandemic to move on with the climate change issue and implement the Green New Deal. One of the lines they came up with is, we have to flatten the climate curve. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
The Club of Rome talked about. Club of Rome was one of the groups that created Agenda 21 at the UN level, and they came out and they said that this is a reboot now of the Green New Deal or their whole issue there using the pandemic. In Colorado, there is a gentleman running for the state legislature who said that the pandemic has proven that we can afford the Green New Deal. So, that's
Oh my.
this is what
When
we're
I,
hearing.
yep, when I first heard about the pandemic in early February, late January, even because I've been going through this, and you probably did the same, but I immediately wondered if this might not be setting up to be a Trojan horse to help move in the goals. And it seems to be, of course, mention that to anyone back then, and you really get at least 5 tinfoil hat awards, right? And
Yeah.
it's crazy. But I was,
Take a look. What was the first thing that happened as they began to shut everything down? Congress passed an emergency bill to keep the economy going, get money into people's pockets, and so forth. What was the first thing Nancy Pelosi did? She put in a whole bunch of other stuff that were part of the Green New Deal. And when you look at the Green New Deal and what it is that they're talking about, see if this doesn't sound familiar. Guaranteeing a job with a living wage, a safe workplace, empowered, a safe workplace empowered by labor unions, single-payer Medicare, and tuition-free education and from preschool to college, and the right to affordable housing. All of those things are in the Green New Deal. They have 4 pillars to the Green New Deal, and that is pillar 1. The Economic Bill of Rights, and that's what it consists of, all those things I just said. Those are all part of exactly what you're hearing. Turn on the news every night, and you're going to hear about affordable housing. You're going to hear about we need a living wage, So, there's that, and what do we hear with these riots in the streets and so forth? These poor people who have been oppressed all these years, and they're just standing up now for their liberty. Yeah, right. It's all part of the same thing.
right. And talking about the news and the media and who owns it and what their agenda is to keep us all in fear, how it's scripted, etc. That's a whole nother topic, but it all plays in with this too. Like you said, they're dealing with the fear, and the more we are afraid, the more we doubt our own critical thinking. So and with the masks, keeping us separated and muzzled and muffled, and that's no accident there. So as I'm sure